Everybody said they saw you. The person you were kissing wasn't me, and I would never ask you. I just kept it to myself. I don't wanna know if you're playing me. Keep it on the low, 'cause my heart can't take it anymore. And if you creeping, please don't let it show. Oh baby, I don't wanna know.
Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Jessica Morehouse, and this is the 4th edition of the Invest in You conference. I'm super excited to share that there's over 1,800 people joining us today, and we all couldn't be more excited. My fellow panelists and I are here to share our knowledge as industry professionals about how we as women can be active participants in our own financial well-being and independence. But first, we want to hear from you. So just a reminder on your screen, please minimize it. You will find a comment section. That is where you can put your questions in there throughout this presentation. And we are going to be doing a Q&A at the end of the hour, so make sure to do that. But let's get started. We have a lot to cover. Let's dive right in. So we take care of our loved ones and we worry about their health and well-being, but what about their financial health and well-being? And what about our financial health and well-being? Are we ready to deal with an emergency or if something unexpected happens? And if it does, how can we be better prepared? And maybe most important of all, how can we have more productive, more constructive conversations about a notoriously touchy and taboo subject with our families? With us to tackle all of this today, we have Tanya Diorio, MBA and Manager of Practice Management at National Bank Financial. Tanya is joining us from Toronto. Next, we have Natalie Rattle from Montreal. She is a financial planner and Associate Vice President of Investment with National Bank. Welcome, Natalie. And last but not least, we have Vanessa Stockbrugger, who joins us from Calgary, where she's a Senior Private Wealth Advisor with National Bank Private Banking, 1859. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we are also lucky enough to hear from two other women, Yasmin and Caroline, who will share their stories about finances and family. But to kick things off, I thought we could do a quick round table on the idea of taking charge of your financial well-being and why some of us might be hesitant to do so. So let's jump in to block one. As I mentioned earlier, money can be a touchy and taboo subject for a lot of families. Why do you think that is? Tanya, let's start with you.
Thank you. I think there's two things that come up. First of all, money is emotional. It can cause feelings of stress when you don't have enough of it, feelings of excitement when you get more, and even feelings of shame and guilt when you haven't planned properly, right? The other thing, too, is that it's private. We don't typically walk around talking about how much we make or how much we spend. And it's even more so with baby boomers where the topic is taboo. So it certainly doesn't make it easy to bring up these types of conversations across generations.
I couldn't agree more. Natalie, on to you.
I can add that it also depends on how we were brought up around the subject of money. So if it was something that was not talked about while we were growing up, well, obviously when you're an adult, it's not something you're going to be comfortable talking about. And it's going to be a subject you shy away from.
And Vanessa, any observations that you'd like to share about, the idea of taking charge of your financial well-being and why some of us might be hesitant to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the hesitation can come because it feels very overwhelming at times, also very intimidating. We use a lot of complex terms sometimes. There's a lot in the media. So understanding what's relevant to us and really deciphering the information so that we can make decisions based on it. I also think there's some fear around
Absolutely.
once you start this discussion, where are we going with this? It can get pretty uncomfortable, so we just want to avoid. The other thing that happens is we delegate. We delegate this such important role to someone else, such as a partner or even a parent, depending on our life stage. And we're going to talk about that can put us at risk for sure.
Absolutely. Now, as we've probably all experienced here, working in finance, the financial field still very male dominated. And because of that, historically, investing and making your money work for you has really just been talking to the men. And when we talk to women, we don't talk about that. We talk about saving and cutting back and budgeting and things like that. In fact, now we know that more than half of women don't feel comfortable investing, and 3 out of 4 say they wish they'd started managing their finances sooner. Vanessa, back to you. You ran a financial coaching business for women for a number of years. Where do you think this discomfort with investing comes from?
Well, when it comes to investing in particular, I think there's a feeling of a knowledge gap. And whether it's present to the extent that it's felt is one thing, but until you fill that knowledge gap, it's very difficult to take action, which isn't a bad thing. But then we have to get that relevant knowledge, make sure that we're learning at the right life stage what kind of investing is important for us. Very different in your 20s versus in your 60s, as an example. And what I've seen is that knowledge builds confidence, and then women take action, and they're keen to participate. Women want to invest, and they make great investors because we tend to be very focused on the long-term plan.
Yeah, no, we make excellent investors, I'd say. And Natalie, I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think it also depends, what are we comfortable talking about? So if I think about my closest friends, or even among anybody's closest friends, what questions are you able to say out loud? So sometimes you might wonder, can we dare to ask those questions, as if, what are you invested in? What do you do with this? Did you ever try that? Who do you recommend? Do you have a plan? What do you do in that type of situation? So a lot of important questions we ask ourselves, but honestly, we never dare to ask them out loud, even to our closest friends.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And yeah, I think we're all shaking our heads. What about you, Tanya? In your experience, why might some of us not put our finances as a priority when we know we should?
Yeah, we're doing a lot. We're either managing a career or managing small children or aging parents, or doing all 3 for that matter. So it's a lot to juggle. And sadly, it's not getting any better with our next generation. 50% of women millennials believe they should be more involved in their finances.
Yeah,
It's a big number.
that's
a big number.
really
Very big number.
big number. Vanessa, I'm curious for you, how can we start doing more, because we want to do more? How should we be approaching our finances and our financial decisions as members of a household?
Well, to me, it's being engaged on the bigger decision making and not the day-to-day. I think we're pretty good on the day-to-day financial decisions, but it's the big decisions that we should be involved in, such as savings, investment, and debt management. If you have a partner, part of a family unit, we want to make sure we haven't delegated this role to one individual. That really puts financial dependence, for women, that puts them at risk. And the other thing that I've heard is that person that has delegated this role, it can be very stressful that everything is on them. And things happen. We have illness, divorce, untimely death, and we don't think these things are going to happen to us. And unfortunately, in my own family, we had a situation early on in my childhood where we lost my father at a very young age, and my mom was a widow at age 35. So now making decisions for herself, for all of us, for kids, and it's a very stressful time as well. You're going through a very emotional time. So we want to make sure that we're involved in those financial decisions.
Absolutely. Now, earlier you did mention that, financial conversations can be intimidating and not everyone feels invited. How can we improve these conversations so they are more inclusive?
Well, the information has to be relevant, right, for our life stage. So we talk about, are you just starting out savings? Are you into retirement? So that's key. Also, I would say with women, we're focused on what does money do as a tool? It's a resource. So how do we use that in order to make decisions? How do we do that to reach our life goals? Okay, so we're very values-based, goals-based. We want to understand, if I make this decision, what is the impact on my life? Can I afford this vacation? Can I afford this experience? So I think that's key. Will I be okay? The other thing I think it's important to point out, I don't know that we need different information, right? But sometimes it's the approach. right? It is how are we feeling welcome to the table? Are we being invited? Is it in a way that we're feeling our concerns are being heard? We want to be listened to. I think that's a way to make us feel more invited.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's a much better way of thinking about things. And Tanya, you look like you have something
you know,
that you
and
wanna
I think about this a lot as a single woman. Often we talk about your partner being married, but we don't all have a spouse or want to have one for that matter. And so really what we want to do is just make sure that we're clear on our objectives, that we're aligning our values. And that doesn't mean that we have to be a portfolio manager.
No, it sure doesn't. And I think that's really important to keep in
is,
mind.
yes.
You don't have to go maybe the route that we all decided to go.
Exactly.
Now, Vanessa, we've heard that many women don't feel like they're doing enough when it comes to owning their finances and their financial well-being. What happens if we don't? What are some of the consequences, and why is it so important that we do take an active role?
Yeah, so let's focus on the positive of what are the positive outcomes if we take a more active role. And the first one really is on your own health and well-being, because finances are stressful, right? Money's ranked as one of the top stresses individually as well as for partners. So first of all, taking charge just reduces that stress. The second reason we need to take charge is to reach our life goals so we can actually be making decisions that we know are going to get us to where we want to be. And the third reason is to be prepared. And so positive outcome, we're prepared for these untimely events, the divorce, maybe illness of ourselves, whatever it might be, but also the positive, exciting choices we have as women where maybe we want to change careers, go back to school, start a family, whatever it might be. And so when we have taken charge, we're able to do those things and say yes.
Yeah, so if I could just do a real quick recap, because we touched on so many great things. First, money is an emotional topic, so it's totally normal if you feel that way. We can totally understand. Second, it makes sense that some of us listening today haven't felt invited to the table when it comes to financial planning because financial conversations haven't always been as inclusive as they should or could have been. And third, it's vitally important that all of us, married, single, kids, no kids, have a good sense of what's going on in our own financial lives. So let's move on to block two, an important first step towards all of this, feeling more comfortable with money and just getting a hold of your own financial situation is that all-important family discussion, which is what we're going to be talking about now. More often than not, women are the ones who shoulder the majority of the workload when it comes to caregiving, whether it's caregiving with children or supporting and caring older family members. And according to Statistics Canada in 2022, more than half of women aged 15 or older provided some sort of care for children or care-dependent adults. And women are 42% more likely to provide care than men. So these are some really striking numbers. Let's start by hearing from Yasmin Grote. She's a marketing freelancer who has been living with her mother for the past 6 years.
My name is Yasmin Grote. I have a digital marketing agency. And 10 years ago, I decided to make my mother come and live with me from Venezuela. And she's been here for 6 years. Because I'm an only child and my mother was living alone in Venezuela, I figured, like, my God, she can't stay alone. I mean, she was getting older. So that's when I decided to really plan and reassess how we were going to be living together and what our income was going to be, because there were a lot of new responsibilities coming my way. I had to take all these things into account and really have a clear vision of what was going to happen and be okay with that, financially, emotionally. I mean, these are big changes. I mean, especially when you're talking about a parent who might be elderly, but at the same time, it's so rewarding. I mean, we're together on a daily basis. We take care of each other. I mean, she supports me too. So it's a really beautiful gift from life that I'm giving her and that she's giving me. I'm really amazed that I was able to do this. And sometimes I'm there like, wow, how did I do this? But it's really step by step. You can't look at the mountain, but also don't lose sight of the big picture. And it's doable because honestly, if I was able to do it, anybody can.
Now, Yasmin's situation is just one example of a fairly common scenario. And often, though, we think these things happen out of the blue. Yasmin talked about making sure you're really ready to take on that kind of responsibility. Tanya, how can we best prepare ourselves for the possibility of supporting a parent or loved one?
Yeah. You know, I think the idea really is you want to be proactive. You don't necessarily want to wait until someone is sick or in financial distress. And based on the video that we just saw, we actually saw that Yasmin did take the responsibility, but she also mentioned it was a big job. So, you know, you want to take that into account. The bottom line is we're not communicating enough. 56% of Canadians have not shared their wishes with their heirs.
That's crazy.
And so often what we see is the older parents don't necessarily want to be a burden.
Yes.
Some of them don't feel a bit shameful or guilty for not having planned properly, right? But at the same time, the kids want to help, but they don't want to put their own retirement at risk. So it makes us all avoid the situation, which can lead us right down the path to stress, conflict, and misunderstanding. So you want to start opening up those conversations in small steps, build that trust over
Absolutely.
time is what you want to see.
Absolutely. Vanessa, it looks like you may have wanted to add something there.
Well, I would like to reinforce that development of a plan. And there's a good saying, goals without a plan are just good intentions, right? So we have very good intentions, but how are we going to do this? And it's very clear that we get that we have to know how we're going to execute, and let's involve the family, and let's involve them early as well, and welcome those diversity of ideas and perspectives, and really let everyone voice their concerns. I also think there's much more likely to be acceptance or buy-in if you've had this discussion, if you've involved others in it.
Absolutely. Kind of starting to use that conversation as that jumping off point to make that plan. And Tanya, I want to go to you. Have you started this conversation with your own family?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because when I heard about this event, I mentioned it to my mother and she was thrilled to be here today. But she also told me I probably won't have any idea what you're talking about. And it was at that point where I brought up the discussion that, well, actually it will be relevant to us. The whole idea of a family meeting was something that I had brought up in the past. And I was shot down because I was told, don't worry about it. Everything's taken care of. We got this. So it certainly, didn't lead to an opening of the conversation, but what ended up happening is I think they wanted to just let me know that they had done their homework.
Yeah.
And, really by me starting to talk about it, it opened up that dialogue and my mother started asking a few more questions.
Great.
She learned about the difference between an executor and a beneficiary. So the
Oh.
executor being the person who executes the instructions of the will, and the beneficiary, the person who will actually inherit the wealth. So, just by creating that conversation starter, it created a productive discomfort to open up that dialogue and create some educational opportunities.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's very normal for parents to want to feel like they're the ones taking care of the children, but we also need to be involved. So that's a great point. Natalie, I want to go to you.
Yes, I want to add an example, actually. You're reminding me of a client that he lost his father recently, and unfortunately, it was not a very good story because the father did not have any legal documents drawn up. So the family did not know what the wishes were. So it's very an unpleasant situation for the family to have to make those decisions, not knowing where to go and what to do. And on top of it, the government was appointed as a trustee to manage all the finances. So that's not a very fun way to manage your finance. But in that story, the good part is that for their own mother, everything is settled. They went to see an advisor, they've drawn up all the legal documents, so they were better prepared. So we've learned from that story. So we're really hoping that nobody would have to live through that again.
Yeah, really turning that bad experience into a good one, an
Absolutely.
educational lesson. So let's say you have opened up the dialogue and decided it's a good time to have that family discussion. Tanya, what are some best practices to make sure that it's an effective discussion?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, when you're ready to do this, preparation is key. We all
Definitely.
talk about planning and preparation, right? So you want to think about who should be there. And so it doesn't have to necessarily be everyone all at once. It can be a series of conversations, but you do want to bring the people that are going to be involved by your wishes and choices to the table. So think about that. The second thing you want to think about is the where. So having a neutral environment, free of distractions, you want to create an open space so that conversation can flow freely. So the where is important. The next thing is you want to be clear on what your objectives are. So having an agenda, sharing that agenda, even going as far as co-creating the agenda together. And it can be things like sharing where your wealth is going and the reasons behind it. It can be philanthropy, it can be concerns. So there's different topics you can bring up. The other idea, I know this sounds a little technical, but I think it is important, and it's really about creating some ground rules. Ground rules will open up that conversation, create that safe space. Things like no interrupting. Let's focus on the issues, not the people. Right? Those types of things. Avoid criticism and blame. Other ideas, right?
Absolutely.
You know, and last but not least, at the end of the day, depending on how complex your situation is, you might want to bring in a facilitator.
Absolutely, and I think maybe we'll probably get some questions about that in the Q&A, but just to
sure.
kind of sum up block 2, because we touched on so many great things here. Number 1, be proactive. I think everyone should take that away from themselves. Don't wait until you have to have that conversation. Do it now. When you're more into having that family discussion, you're ready. It's important to be prepared. Like you said, you have so many great points about how to facilitate that conversation. And then know that these conversations can be about different things. You don't have to talk about everything under the sun. You can talk about numbers. You can talk about wishes. There's lots of time to have multiple conversations. So let's move on to block 3 now, which really brings us back to the idea of the values approach to money, which we spoke about earlier. And that resonates with so many of us today, and I think it will come up in our next topic. But first, let's go to another story from Caroline Codsey. She's always taken a values-driven approach to money and finances, and she is the president and founder of Women in Governance, and she is going to share her story about why helping her children buy a property was so important to her.
I am Caroline Codsey, founder and chief equity officer at Women in Governance, and I have helped both my children become owners and landlords. I grew up in the Lebanese Civil War, and at age 17, I moved to Paris without my parents, without any money, and so I had to very quickly learn how to manage a budget, how to have a couple of jobs on top of going to school and then putting myself through university. At age 23 and 25, my children moved in together and they quickly realized it was way too much money to spend on rent. And then they found a great triplex and I decided to help them with the down payment. From a very young age, I realized how important financial autonomy was. And I think this is why I really wanted to ensure that both my children really were able to manage their finances well. But also what I do for a living at Women in Governance was also partly to ensure that women were able to manage their own money, that no woman made choices in her life based on not being able to accomplish their dreams. As a mom, I'm unbelievably proud of what my children have accomplished. I think I can safely say my work here is done.
Wow, what a powerful story. Before we dive right in, Natalie, would you please be able to explain to us the difference between a living inheritance and then the distribution of an estate upon death?
Absolutely, and I will also take the example of Caroline's video. It was a very, very good example of a living inheritance. So a living inheritance is giving money when you're still alive. It's making sure that you're executing your own wishes, so you get to see the benefits on the people you're giving to. So you're giving donations, you're giving gifts to the loved ones. That's the living inheritance. And then when you die, everything that you own will go to your estate. An executor will take your estate and distribute it to your heirs depending on your will. As for the estate, it's the legal process, it's the laws, it's the regulations around when somebody dies. So whether you have a will or not, you will still have an estate, you will have an executor, but it will be depending on the laws of the province you live in and your will that will be able to say, okay, who gets what and what is the job of the executor to do.
Now, what are some reasons that someone might want to consider a living inheritance?
Well, life expectancy is very, very way up. Now we're over 90 years and plus. So at that age, our kids are, 50, 60 years old. And at that age, it's not them that they need help. It's much earlier when they're in their 20s and their 30s. Like we saw in Caroline's video, you want to give them money to help them out with their first property. The housing market is crazy now, so how to help your kids. So that's one way of helping your kids from your living with a living inheritance, a gift. like the example we saw. Then we have the grandparents who want to give money to their grandchildren for their schools. That's another example. And like you mentioned before, philanthropy, you can give to different charities, and you do get a tax credit for charitable donations, so that's a plus. There's a lot of ways that you can give from your living. It could be assets that you want to give, like a piano, a piece of art, to someone who really will treasure it. So depending, there's lots of things, but the one thing to keep in mind, giving money to your kids young, it's educating them. It's teaching them the good financial skills in order for them to be able even better at that, at their own financials when they're much older. So that's a good point to keep in mind. It's a good financial education.
Absolutely. Tanya, you mentioned before we hit record here that you've done something similar with one of your clients. Would you like to share?
Yes, I had an advisor who had a client who wanted to gift $100,000 to each of his children, but on the condition that they would each do a financial plan. And that the whole idea behind that was the education and the fiscal responsibility involved. So it certainly did that.
Yes.
Yeah, I bet. That makes a lot of sense. Actually, I
does,
feel like more
yes.
people should be doing that. Vanessa, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Well, I think in the time of rising interest rates and costs and inflation, there's really become a affordability issue. And so this is an opportunity with a living inheritance to provide those assets at a time, like you said, when they're most valuable potentially. And we also have this generation that generally does have more means than in the past to help their children now. So I think it can make a lot of sense and be a great thing. I would just caution that it's not for everyone, and I think we have to be very careful to make sure the implication on our own retirement, if you're contributing to your children's house down payment, that kind of thing, you don't want that to be to the detriment of your own financial situation. So just important to understand that and not feel pressure or guilt around it, right? We already have enough issues, feelings around money, so let's make sure that we do that in a very comfortable way.
Absolutely. Natalie, I wanted to come back to you. What types of things do people need to think about when they are really considering setting up that living inheritance?
Well, I'd like to say that what we just heard is very important.
Yes.
Do not give money if you cannot afford it.
Yes.
That's step one. But besides that, a lot of people, what they do, the easiest way is you just sell what you have and you give the money to your loved one. So that's the easy way to do it. But you can also want to give money from your different investments. And if you do want to do that, you have to make sure, you have to remember one thing, there are taxes to be paid. So if you take money out from your investment and you made some gains on the investment, like $1,000 extra gain. So if you started at $10,000, it's $11,000. With that extra $1,000, it's like extra money you've made. So you will pay taxes on it. So that you have to remember. So depending on which account you were taking the money from, you could pay taxes. So you cannot escape the tax part. Also for a residence, remember that if you sell your own house, your own property, your own, not property, but your principal residence, it's tax-free. You don't pay taxes. If it's a cottage and an income property, that's another story. You want to sell it and give the money away, well, for sure you will pay taxes. You will pay taxes on the capital gain. Everything that you've made extra since you've purchased on the property. So you do have to keep that in mind. So it's a very complex subject, eh? So we really recommend that you seek a tax specialist in order to help you with all this planning, and an estate lawyer as well. They will be able to guide you in that subject.
Absolutely. So besides taxes, I'm sure lots of people are kind of wondering, are there any restrictions on who can be on the receiving end of this type of gift?
Absolutely not. You can give to whatever you want to whoever you want. But you do have to make sure that you see an advisor. You have to be able to plan this properly, like we said before. You need to plan it, you need to organize it, you need to make sure you have the means to do so. You cannot give your money and not take care of your own retirement or not taking care of your own financials. So it's very important to do so. And to seek the experts, like we said. But you do have to remember one thing. Giving a living inheritance, it's not an obligation, it's a choice. Like we saw in the video, it's cultural, it's in our values. We want to help our kids, but we have to have the means to do so. It's really not an obligation.
Absolutely. So just to summarize all these great points here about living gifts and traditional inheritances. So first, there's pros to both types of inheritances. So we need to consider both options. Either way, you can make sure that your wishes are respected no matter what direction you want to go into. And ultimately, it is your money and it's your choice. And it is complex, like you've mentioned. So whatever you choose to do, I mean, definitely, consult somebody, a financial advisor who will be able to walk you through it. Now, on to our final block, block 4, saving for retirement, giving a living inheritance, supporting family members. Gosh, these are all goals that require a plan and require financial assets, which brings us to our next topic. To properly prepare for any of the situations we've discussed today, you have to maximize your money and make it work for you. And if you're going to make a habit of engaging with your finances on a regular basis, which I think we all can agree is a great idea, it's really important to make sure that money is not that default stressful topic, and often it is in our lives. So having said that, there are uncertain economic times, to say the least. I feel like I've been saying that for many years, but here we are. We've got inflation that is still high, rising costs, rising interest rates are putting a pinch on all of us Canadians. We keep on hearing the word recession, and no one likes that word. So I think a lot of us feel a lot of uncertainty and just out of control with our finances. So Vanessa, you've made a career out of helping people approach their finances with a more positive perspective, which is great. What advice do you have for people during these uncertain times and this current economy?
Yeah, well, definitely uncertain times, but it's always the same. Let's get informed. Knowledge is power. And so let's not read the headlines and assume that there's a certain impact on us. And so 2 key areas in the household that I'd want to touch on. And the first one is debt. So we hear about rising interest rates, but what is truly the impact on our household? And is it fixed rate debt that we have? Is it variable rate debt? And so if there is a higher cost to some of the debt we have, maybe we'll want to apply additional cash against that. But let's be informed and to make that decision. If you have a mortgage renewal coming up in the next 6 months,
It's going to cost you more.
let's get on it. Let's start having the discussion with a mortgage advisor. And so we know that their terms have changed. And so let's get informed. The second part that the household should be looking at is what is their cash available? What savings do they have? And so if they followed some good advice out there, right, maybe they built up an emergency fund. So 3 to 6 months of expenses, covered. You might have to tap into that cash right now. Or if you haven't built that up, now's a good time. We have uncertain environments. Let's build it. It's for the foreseeable future here. And with these rising interest rates, there's also an opportunity to now earn a pretty much risk-free rate of return on our cash. Let's make sure we're doing those things and that we're gaining wherever we can.
Absolutely, something that everyone can do right after this presentation. Now, we talked about, feeling out of control with their money during these uncertain times, and how often money is that default stressful topic. How do we change our approach on that front, Vanessa?
Well, I just keep coming back to what can we control? And so, unfortunately, higher prices are probably here to stay. And when we talk about inflation decreasing, we're meaning the rate of prices increasing at a less pace. It's not prices coming down. So I think we have to kind of get it a bit more comfortable with this environment, focus on where we can make changes in this new climate. And in my coaching company that you talked about, I like to develop tools, have some fun with this, right? Instead of being disinterested, let's have some fun. So one of the tools that I developed was how do we have ability to make changes to our expenses? And this was honestly studying elementary school science with my 2 daughters. I said, you know what? Our expenses are like solids, liquids, and gases. And that's where we have
It's so good,
we have the
Vanessa.
ability to make change depending. So solid expenses, these are our rent, mortgage, property taxes, insurance premiums. You can't get off this webinar and just cancel all of those. Please don't, right? Those are costs we need to have. So very sticky though. Liquid expenses, those are more variable. We have control over them, but they're in our household in some way. So we all buy groceries, clothing, transportation. But if I'm buying fresh, organic produce, very different than buying frozen vegetables, as an example. So we really want to understand where we can make changes and choices in that category. Gas expenses. Completely discretionary, these can be released if we need to. But they're also the fun things in life, ladies. So we want to make sure we're very intentional with them, that we're making choices that matter to us. So vacations, hobbies, right? The brand names. haircuts, but is that a liquid or a gas? And you raise a good point. Natalie, you know, what happens, the conversation between partners when you go through this exercise, is this a liquid? Is this a gas expense? What can we change? And so I encourage you, go through 12 months of expenses. Instead of that boring, you know, credit card, oh, how did it get to this level? How are we gonna cut back? Go through the expenses, categorize, and then it's much more actionable. You can actually make changes.
I love it. I love it.
Natalie's going home to do that tonight.
I'm
really-
not
really
cutting my
helpful
haircuts, I'm
advice.
telling you.
So helpful and a really easy way to remember that. Tanya, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
You know,
after
I think at the end of the day, when we think about buying discounted produce or reducing some of our expenses, that it won't make a big difference on a one-time basis, and it really won't. It's really that mindset and discipline that we're trying to instill within us.
Vanessa, it looks like you're agreeing.
Yeah, well, I mean, mindset, absolutely, being intentional. I mean, we work so hard for the money that we earn,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
Hard-earned money, so we put in so much time and energy. We also should be putting in that time and energy as to where it goes. And it may seem small, the online subscriptions, though, how many of them do we have? And they really start to add up. And what I found is when people go through this exercise, they find something that they don't make use of, that they can cancel. And there's such a sense of satisfaction. And then there's a snowball effect. What else can we have? So it's just really about removing any unintentional spending.
Absolutely. Do you think there's any other areas that you think households could or should be focusing on in this climate?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's maybe not as exciting as solid liquid gas expenses, but you know, workplace group benefits. These are something that I just often see are not well understood and then often underutilized as well. And so in this kind of environment, they really can provide additional value. So imagine, you know, that day you're hired and you're bombarded with all of this information, you're not focused on your group benefit plan. So now's the time, pull it back out, make sure that you're not on the benefit default plan, and that you're not missing some things on that. The other thing I'd point out is that plans are changing. They're really reflecting the interests of employees, and so make sure that there's maybe there's some perks in there that you can get value from.
Do you think, you know, what specifically, I guess, because I'm sure people think about this, would you recommend that people do or look at to take advantage of some of these potentially valuable plans? Because they're all different.
Well, yeah, in the first step, you have to do the homework, right? You have to go on your company intranet, you have to pull out that booklet again, and you really do have to understand what the choices are. And then you have to say, well, what's of value to me? So if I have children and, you know, maybe dental and medical are expenses that are significant in my household. So I'd want to choose a plan that has a higher value on that. So making it very specific, no default plan, and revisit it. And usually we can make changes
Yes,
once a
absolutely.
year.
Once a year,
Once a
definitely.
year, so revisit, have my plans changed? Maybe kids have moved out, right? There's some differences there. The last point would be to coordinate if you do have a partner with a plan.
Yes.
Okay, and so making sure you're not paying for more than you need to. Maybe keeping flexibility in one plan around health spending accounts, wellness dollars, whatever they might be called in your plan. Keep that flexibility.
Was there anything else that you wanted to add, you know, especially in terms of, you know, different savings programs?
Yeah, good point. Yes, we want to talk about matching savings programs. So that's usually part of that overall benefits plan. Once again, sometimes underutilized, and this is free money, right? But let's understand all the different parts to it. So the way a matching savings program works is the employee contributes to a savings plan, and then the employer also contributes. So this is how you're immediately...
It's a gift.
You're getting an immediate return. But we do have some decisions to make around that. And the first one is, are we going to participate? And then how much? And that should be based on, well, what is the matching with the company? Do you over-contribute that amount? Do you know, or do you put in that minimum? It's really also based on your financial situation. The other decision that most people don't always recognize is that you choose the type of account for this program, okay? And it's expanded beyond just the regular non-registered taxable account. We now are seeing RRSPs, tax-free savings accounts, TFSA accounts. So it provides a lot of flexibility, but know you have the choice, and there's a tax impact to that, tax benefit usually. Now, one word of caution, don't over-contribute.
Yes.
Right? You have a personal plan, you have a workplace plan. I have seen this happen. You got to keep track. There's limits on RRSPs and TFSAs. So that's key. The third area that for sure is often missed with these savings plans is you have the ability to choose the investments.
Yeah.
So there are a list of them, but the risk level you want to take on, right? What are your objectives? So make sure you're making those decisions effectively, that it's not default.
Yeah, I see too many people just, not even think about it. A year goes by and they're in something really conservative and they're 25. So
Yes.
Exactly.
it's really important to stay on top of things. Well, let's sum up all the great points that we just made. So number one is get informed. I feel like that's kind of like the whole point of this panel. Get informed about your own personal financial situation. What kind of debt are you carrying? What's your liquidity? Things like that. Next, a really great practice after this is to do an audit of your expenses based on what we can and cannot change, like Vanessa discussed. I love the solid liquid gas model.
I
That's
love it,
something that's
love
going to
it.
stick in my head forever. And lastly, don't forget about your group plan, and often people do. And, I think we can all agree, sometimes it's leaving free money on the table. It is part of your work compensation, so take advantage of all of that. Well, in the time that we have left, I'm very excited about this part, this portion. We are going to get to our Q&A, but I'm going to give everyone a minute or so before we get to that. I just want to know if anyone has any final thoughts. Vanessa, I want to go to you first.
Well, I would like to sum up, how I developed these different ideas. So I have something called the 4 E's of building financial strength that I just love to share with everyone today. And the first E is engage. So this is a very important role. Be engaged, make this a priority. Let's make sure that our finances are something that we're focusing on personally. The second E is educate, right? Build the knowledge, accurate, relevant, seek that knowledge out. Webinars such as this, podcasts, articles, books, whatever it might be. The third E is execute. Take action, right? And this is scary. This is the scary part because now we're really putting ourselves, we're making that decision. But look for the support, and those are small intentional steps that you talked about, Tanya, makes a huge difference overall. The fourth E is experience. And this really is to recognize that we all have different life experiences and backgrounds. Have we talked about money in our household? All these different factors that really impact what we're comfortable with. So do what's right for you.
I love your 4 E's.
Love that.
Really quick,
love it.
I got,
Natalie, did you want to share a real quick little
Go
tip?
very quickly. So you need to plan, see an advisor, speak to a specialist.
Tanya?
And when I think of a family meeting, my 3 points: plan ahead, be persistent. It won't necessarily come at the first conversation, so open up that dialogue. And then you also want to prepare. So building that agenda, your objectives. And remember, it doesn't always have to be about money. So keep that in mind when building that agenda.
Great final tips. Now to the exciting part, the Q&A. We've got some questions that have been rapidly coming in throughout this presentation. I'm going to start the first one. Whoever wants to grab it. Where is the best place to start being more involved in these financial decisions? There's obviously a lot of areas in financial planning. What's maybe the most important, or where should your priority be?
Well, I would say it's the a balance sheet essentially, a net worth statement for your household. And that too. That was it. I mean, really that idea of where do you have today? What do you have for investments? What do you have for bank accounts? And I think our lives have gotten quite a bit more complicated. We can have accounts all over. So first step was, where am I at today? What do we have for debt in the household? And get very clear on understanding and build out the net worth statement, or essentially a balance sheet for your household.
That's amazing. Does anyone else want to add anything or want to move on to the next one?
I think she summed it up beautifully. It's really figuring out where your money's going today, right? And going from there. So.
Okay, the next one's a bit meaty. I've been talking to my son about finances his whole life. However, do you have any advice on at what age we should share real details about our net worth and our investments? Or do we never share that? Or do we only share the plan at a high level? How do I know what's the right thing to do?
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Certainly a family conversation, discussion. And I really don't think there's an age per se. I mean, obviously they want to be an adult. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're communicating your wishes, that you're taking into account their goals, your goals. To me, it's all about communication over time. What do you guys think?
I'll just add that when your child is born, your wishes should already be written somewhere in your will, and you already should have all your legal documents already drawn up. You don't know. We don't know when we're going to die. We don't know when our time is up, and when it's going to be time. You have to be ready. So there is no time, but get everything drawn up. If they're too young, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The executor will take care of it. But if they're old enough, well, they'll get more involved and they'll understand.
Vanessa, any?
No, it sounds.
They summed it up pretty
covered it,
good, didn't they? Yeah. Next question. I'm worried about my parents' retirement. So this is kind of like a part two, but from the other side. I'm worried about my parents' retirement, and they don't seem like they want to discuss it. I can relate to this. What are my options if I want to be financially prepared to help them?
It's a topic I brought up.
Yeah.
Certainly something that's not easy to do, again, with our baby boomers. You want to start small. And you want to be able to have those conversations over time. I think, Natalie, you might have mentioned at one point that you had clients who came in for a financial plan. So even the idea of bringing in your parents to do a plan just to get them a little bit more comfortable, if that's the case, that might be an idea.
And I think this is a good, we see this transition of the different generations, and going back and combining the last question even to this one, and parents' responsibility to financially educate children, and you have to do that at the age appropriate level is very important. And I have to say, my mom in her situation, then she took that opportunity to educate all of us, which was fantastic. But then those conversations continue on and they grow, and and it kind of becomes then that you are helping your parents too to maybe get clarity on what makes sense for them. So I think the earlier you can start these dialogues, then it's just normal for your household.
Yep.
Yeah, those conversations should never stop. And I think a lot
Never.
of parents think, oh, once they're of adult age, we don't need to talk about anything until later. But no, they should always be happening, right? Yes. Oh, do you have one more thing to say?
I mentioned persistency when it comes to talking to our parents. Keep going back. If I look at my
Yes.
situation, my first time didn't work out, but then, another opportunity came up where I brought up the conversation, and I'm hoping that it's going to continue.
Yeah, there's one resource I'll bring up. There's a book called Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk, literally about
wow.
how to have those conversations.
resource.
So that might be a book that people want to check into if they don't know where to start. But moving on to a new question. For those of us who have already started investing, do you have any additional tips or advice when it comes to managing our finances?
Sure. Well, once again, start with what do you have, and make sure you understand that. I think that sometimes there can be a blurring between type of account and how that works. How does an RSP account work? How does a TFSA work? And what makes sense for you at a certain age changes as well. And know that then that's an account. Then you decide what you're putting into that account, how you're investing it. So making sure you understand investment products, reviewing how does a stock work, owning a public company, how does a bond work, how does a mutual fund work, or an exchange traded fund. So I think you can continue to build your knowledge whether or not you use those products, but continue to understand what's out there. I'm a big fan of reading, Globe articles, Bloomberg, those types of things that can really help to educate if you're especially get interested in investing.
I'm curious, does anyone have any other kind of recommendations for resources, especially about investing? Because I'm sure we're going to get some questions. Does anyone have a favorite book or resource?
One of my favorites is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
great
Really
book.
talks about that emotional aspect to money, because at the end of the day, we all know that money is emotional. And I feel that he really grasps that and communicates that well in his book.
You can also register on the NBC.ca. There's lots of articles that we post there. And on LinkedIn as well, if you follow the National Bank, you'll have a lot of good articles that you can go and get.
And it doesn't have to be complicated.
No.
Right? We're not trying to become portfolio managers like I mentioned earlier, but it's really
Exactly.
just getting the basics, enough to know that you're meeting your goals.
And
that
then
you have a
build
plan.
the knowledge, to the extent, because I do see, women get excited about this in particular, and then they continue to build their knowledge, but you do that over time.
Exactly.
It's what I found, especially where I started as someone who knew nothing. You have to build upon it. You start from ground zero. then start taking advantage of some of those free
Absolutely.
resources, reading those books at kind of a beginner level, and then you can build upon, and that just builds your confidence and helps everybody. We got a really great question. Can you repeat the 4 E's, please? So someone wants to write that down. Remember.
Yes, I can. Engage. Engagement is key, right? Let's make this a priority. Educate, so the knowledge that we need in order to make decisions. And then, I mean, I think the third E is probably the most important, but we can't jump there, is execution. Execute, take action. This is where the magic happens. This is where change occurs. Fourth E, experience. Making sure you're making decisions that feel right for you.
Yeah, and we talk about that execution. We've mentioned it, all three of us. Don't feeling like a living inheritance is a must, and the family meeting starting small. So just start.
Yes.
Right? Take action and pick up the phone and begin that conversation.
Now, of the 4 E's, the education component, someone has a question. Where is a good place to start learning? I can share a little bit more about my experience because it's intimidating when you are at the start point. Very intimidating space to enter the financial space.
And you want reputable information.
And you want, so you also have
accurate.
to do your due diligence, be like social media, anyone can say anything, so you gotta be careful. For me, it was about finding voices that really resonated with me, and sometimes there's so much information, so many books, find voices that you can connect to, and that will get you more interested in continuing to learn. Does anyone else wanna share anything?
Make sure it's reputable too, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you can kind of fall into a rabbit hole on
Yes.
Google. So Google is not necessarily your friend
Yes. Yeah.
in situations like this. So you want
I
to be
found that for women in particular, they like to have that live or a webinar type of videos, as well as articles versus an entire book maybe on the subject.
Yeah.
I found it difficult. I do love Morgan Housel's book, but to have every chapter be relevant, but you feel, I got to get through all of this, you're really picking out the relevant information.
Reading those articles kind of automatically chunkifies it for you. And so you can
Exactly.
digest it in little pieces. Someone says, you mentioned the importance of having a financial advisor several times throughout this presentation. What criteria should one consider when choosing an advisor? Who wants to take this one?
That's an excellent question.
It's an excellent question. You know, you want to make sure that you have a sense of trust with this individual and that you also feel a good fit with them. Several other ideas, I'm sure you
Well,
guys
I would ask the question, what is their typical client? And, you know, and are you the right fit for them because it's good for them and it's good for you? You don't ever want to feel like someone's doing you a favor because it's not a right fit. So there's that connection that you talk about, you know, that voice too, that absolutely trust and feeling comfortable because you are going to be really building this relationship. It should be a strong relationship over time.
And also, there's different advisors at the National Bank. So depending what your needs are, we will guide you to the right person. So keep that in mind. You don't have to necessarily overlook it. Yes, exactly. We'll guide you.
And I guess one important thing to do is maybe make a list of what your needs are. 'cause most people
Exactly,
may not
yes.
know what they need.
Yes.
If you take some time to think about it, write it down, that might be a great starting point to then find someone who really connects to all those dots that you just wrote down. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have. Thank you so much. Oh, this was so much fun. We would, of course, like to thank everyone who attended today. And honestly, just the fact that you are here showing up, that is a good sign because showing up is the first step always. It really is a great sign of you taking the next steps for improving your own financial well-being. So I'm very encouraged. I hope you are too. Now, to kind of share just a little about what we discussed today, because I know we touched a lot of points. Today we talked about money and why it's such a sensitive topic for so many of us. How can we best prepare ourselves to support our loved ones without compromising our own financial situations? When and why a living inheritance may or may not be the right choice for you. And lastly, how to take advantage of a group plan, those work benefits, maximize your money by making it work for you. But I would have to say that the most important takeaway, I think personally, is to take an interest and take an ownership in your finances. Talk to the people around you. Don't be worried about asking questions or seeking help to, clarify things if things don't make any sense. For instance, there are a lot of eager and informed, helpful specialists at National Bank who are keen to help out, so don't be shy. I want to say a big thank you to my panelists, Tanya,
pleasure.
Natalie, and Vanessa for sharing
Thank
all
you,
of your
Jessica.
expertise. Thank you so much. Invest in You is part of the National Bank's efforts towards the financial independence of women. To learn more, please visit nbc.ca/women. I'm Jessica Morehouse. Thank you so much for joining me. And all of you, have a good day.